Hello, everybody. This is Doug Kaywood, and I'd like to thank you very much for joining us today for our first in a new webinar series where we're really trying to help manufacturers during this time of this coronavirus to have actionable solutions to immediate needs that they have due to this virus, as well as try to apply some of those best practices to kind of key leadership skills. So, John, if you can go to the next slide. So this will be the agenda that we're going to follow today. We'll start off, first of all, again, let me introduce myself. So Doug Kaywood, I'm one of the co-founders of the NxGen Group. We're sort of a boutique manufacturing consulting firm that really focuses on very actionable sets of resources and services. And we partner with a lot of organizations like SESME and Microsoft and MXD and others around the industry. So we've put together this seminar series, and as you can see, we're going to have two topics today, and then I'll wrap up at the end. So the first topic is going to be around how General Mills basically had a very urgent need that popped up right at the very beginning of this whole, when they were seeing this coronavirus starting to pop up as an issue around, I think not only the U.S. but also around the world. So we'll hear from Chris Damsgard, principal engineer from General Mills, about that, and then and he'll be interviewed by Jim Wetzel. And then in the second topic, we have Doug Berger, who's going to basically apply some of those principles, as well as just kind of in general talk about how to apply key leadership skills and practices in times of crisis that also may apply, as we move out of this, into really helping your company to be very transformational in the way that it shapes its culture and competes in the industry. At the end of this, I'll walk through some logistics, but during the course of the conference, you'll be able to do Q&A with all the speakers and chat with each other, all the attendees as well as the presenters. And then we are planning on having a couple of polling questions, so I'll look for those and we'll look forward to your response on that. And then at the end of this, I'll talk about kind of some of the follow-up items as well as the next webinar topic. So to kind of, you can go to the next slide there, John, would be great. So General Mills, like so many other companies right now, has really experienced huge, very earth-shattering change in their demand. Certain products have their demand has dropped to lower levels. Other products has dropped to extremely high levels, and they're really trying to figure out how they adjust to all of that. Additionally, they also have had to really handle and manage a lot of significant changes in their workforce in the plants. Adjusting schedules to allow for social distancing, as well as just needing more people in the plants due to all this increased demand. And actually, a side note, one of the things I think is super impressive is that General Mills employees that are non-plant employees, over 700 of them volunteered to work in the plants because they know how important this all is. So our first topic is going to be listening to Chris Damsgard. He'll be interviewed by Jim Wetzel on some of the things that they did at the beginning of this crisis and they're doing today. All right, I'll turn it over to you guys.
Thank you so much, Doug, and welcome, Chris. And John, could you go to the next slide, please? I'd like to introduce to you Chris Damsgard. Chris is currently a principal engineer at General Mills, responsible for global reliability, and I'll have him say a few words about that. I think all of you know General Mills, but General Mills is a recognized leader in the food industry, over hundreds of trusted brands across the globe. And like Doug had said, they're currently running at full speed to meet the demands of the marketplace. And so as other business has been affected very negatively from COVID-19, General Mills also has a lot of responses and issues to deal with, but primarily because they're trying to reach full production. So topics of trying to figure out what the right products are, what the demand is, who needs what, when, where, what, all of that stuff, while the virus is going across the organization, across the communities, and trying to make sure we have staffing at plants to be able to run the facilities are all of great concern. I'd like to introduce Chris. And Chris, could you just first say a little bit about the position that you have at General Mills, and then we'll get into the opportunity.
Sure. So principal engineer at General Mills. I've been here 20 years and had roles across R&D and engineering. My current role is in global reliability. And our mission is to improve our existing assets, our equipment, manufacturing lines, and then try to sustain those improvements so that we can extend the life of our assets. But right now, a lot of our work is going into just making sure our plants are running as best they can.
So Chris, can you say something about that and what the opportunity is?
The opportunity around this technology and the headsets.
Well, let's back up a little bit before we get into technology. Let's talk
Okay.
about the opportunity at General Mills and what the current situation is and how the technology and solution actually comes about. So let's
Yeah.
kind of first frame up the problem.
So being that we make food, it's critical at this time. You go to the grocery store, there's challenges around what's on the shelf. And so like every food company right now, we're trying to make sure that we can get our product out there and continue to deliver. And we've been, as a company, been successful during this time, but not without challenge. With the stay-at-home orders that we have, our entire headquarters was one of the first companies in Minnesota to send everyone home and keep people out of our manufacturing plants. And so our problem was we still have troubleshooting to do, experts that are here in Minneapolis at our headquarters that would normally be supporting plants and now can't go there. We have capital projects that are continuing. We have new product startups that need to continue moving forward, and nobody can be where they need to be.
Perfect. So let's start framing up the solution a little bit. What is the solve? And John, could you go to the next slide, please?
So we were well positioned for this. About 2 years ago, we started looking at how to save on travel and to make it easier for work-life balance. People who are in the plants all the time, can they do some of their job over video? And so we looked at a tablet-based solution, and being a loud environment, we really had to solve the audio problem to be able to carry on a clear conversation live rather than just taking some videos with a tablet or camera and emailing those around. That had kind of been the old way of doing things. You can quickly lose track of some of your, you're taking pictures of your proprietary equipment. You don't want that floating around. And so the live tablet approach was much better. It leveraged our infrastructure. We used Microsoft Skype. And so we were able to tap into that environment through the Skype application. And then the gem of it was to have an audio headset that would allow for that clear communication. And we've worked with a number. You see Sana there, they do Harley Davidson technology, among other motorcycles. We've used a lot of 3M headsets. We've used Honeywell headsets. Somatics is another company that we've looked at. So that there's a number of great headset providers out there that can help in those loud environments so that you can have this kind of a call. So as I said, we started that 2 years ago. That left us well positioned for this time of stay at home. We knew how to do this well and people had experience with it. So it was just more, we need more. So the challenge then became sourcing to be able to get enough of these devices into the places that we needed them as soon as the stay at home orders started to hit. And because we knew what we needed, we were able to move quickly. We were able to get after the pieces that we need and put more of these together and get them out. Beyond our plants, we do a lot of external manufacturing as well. And so we needed to get those locations set up. We also had, being at the end of our fiscal year, we've got some inventory counts that need to happen. Rather than, again, sending folks into those locations, we're able to do a fair amount of that with video.
So Chris, I want to stop you there and ask you some questions about, as I look at this solution and you've got headsets and you've got tablets and you've got PCs and you've got Skype and all of that technology, did you have to work closely with the IT department, being that you're from the engineering department? And could you talk about how all that went?
Thankfully at General Mills, you hear about convergence between IT and OT. We've done that really well at General Mills for, I would say, decades, a long time. And so that set us up well to, yes, work with IT around what are the implications for networking going to be? What kind of controls, mobile device management, MDM, are we going to apply to this, that if these tablets walk off, that we ensure, that they're not going to be useful to anybody if they want to steal them. Those kinds of things. Monitoring the Skype performance, and if we had issues, digging into some of the diagnostics. So there was a lot of interaction, especially on the front end of this. We were able to smooth out those items pretty quick by working together.
I see also with the hard hats and with a noisy environment and taking these devices out on the factory floor, have there been any challenges or issues with networks, communications, dead spots, hardening of equipment? What happens if people drop stuff? Just kind of the environment that we have to work in on the shop floor.
Yeah, great points. All of the above. So when it comes to the tablet, obviously we make food, and so anything that could be glass related is of top concern to us. And so the tablets themselves, they have the Gorilla Glass. They say they're great, but we're not taking any chances. So we leverage really hardened cases. We happen to use OtterBox. There's others out there that not only is a tank and protects this thing if it were dropped, the glass shouldn't break, but even if it did, they also have glass containment screens over the top so that nothing's getting out of that tablet. And so that was the first step, is protect those. When it came to the network, we weren't willing to wait for perfection to get started. We're far from perfect. We were going to leverage it as best we could where it was, ready and available. And thankfully, most of our plants do have good Wi-Fi coverage. I'm going to say 80 to 90% of what we needed has been there. And so in places we haven't had it, we have either put in a new access point sometimes, if we could. Then we have also leveraged cellular hotspots. There's been some cases externally where they didn't have Wi-Fi available, so we just run to Verizon or AT&T and grab a hotspot and get an account to make that possible. One of the big challenges with mobile devices, when you have access points and you're moving around a facility, is that they tend to hang on to the first access point that they connected to as long as possible. And so as you get further and further away from that, you may be standing right under the next access point and yet not joined to it. It's kind of a stickiness, known issue around some of these devices. So that's been a challenge. We overcome that by trying to connect once we're in position of where we want to use those. So a bit of a pro tip there.
Okay, thanks, Chris. I'm going to take a quick break, and John, if you could bring up the poll. We have a couple polling questions we're going to try to send your way. There we go. So the first question, is your company pursuing the use of remote assistance for mobile or plant workers? Please answer, yes, we have, and we actually already have it. And number two, maybe, we're looking at some options, or no, it's not applicable, or we don't really have that need. Question number two, what approach would your company follow to actually execute something like this? Would you buy a complete solution from a vendor? Would you just whip and kludge something together as fast as possible using whatever tools you had? Or would you try to use the existing assets that you had and deploy them in a new manner? Maybe you've already purchased a video conferencing system and you're just trying to figure out how that goes. We'll give you just a few minutes for that. See, the answers are coming in. And while the answers are coming in, Chris, I'd just like you to continue and say, I saw on the public forum, I think it was in Facebook, that John Church, the Chief Supply Chain Officer from General Mills, recently had a video about General Mills, and actually this topic of remote access and broad deployment across the plants was highlighted. Can you say more about the impact that it's had across the organization, and how it came to be the Chief Supply Chain Officer is actually talking about this in this COVID-19 time period?
Yeah, so with the spend that goes on for these, it certainly gets talked about on those who are looking at budgets and our spend around COVID-19 coronavirus responses. So it's definitely made news that way, but it has really enabled us to continue activities that would not have been able to continue. If all your experts are locked out, essentially, the best you're going to be able to do is phone calls and sending pictures and emails and videos via email. And so being able to have that live interaction as you're starting up a new product, perhaps, or change to an existing product, you need to look at it. You need to that kind of constant engagement in real time, right in the middle of the battle. If this is happening, a day later, it's too late in a lot of cases. And so to bring those experts in has been tremendous. Same thing on the inventory front, where we have requirements, things that we have to do to be able to do that live, rather than maybe risking not at all, or risking people's health to be able to pull that off. And so it's also allowed people to distance even within the plant. They don't have to be all right together to be talking to each other.
Okay, thank you. And as I look at this, Chris, a lot of it's a one-to-many kind of conversation. How do you take a look at possibly training opportunities or social distancing, where it's already come up numerous times in this conversation that, we got workers, but how do we have workers work when you don't want to have them close to each other? And
Yeah.
then we've also talked about how do you deal with the situation of where you have new workers that might not be the most expert because people could called in sick and you've got temporary folks coming in. So have you seen an opportunity to take advantage of not only bringing remote people in, but also having expertise and training type of situations?
Yeah, that's the hot topic right now for us. Our learning leaders at each of our plants are looking closely at how to best do this. And there's a number of methods. It doesn't have to entirely be audio communication, as you're standing right there with each other. We can work some things down to hand signals to stay apart, and certainly they're staggering their lunches and breaks and those kind of things to stay apart. But when it comes to training and bringing on board, we have started working closely with Sana around their headset technology, because they set up a mesh of headsets that allows for multiple people to be talking to each other without having to introduce more expensive two-way radios and those kind of things. It's a very good, quick way to jump in and have those conversations. And the good news is that same mesh of conversation can now tie in to our tablets. And so they can participate with that remote expert at the same time as well. That's going to be really important in the weeks ahead.
Okay, Chris, we're heading to a close here. What would you say to folks that might want to pursue this and get into remote assistance and/or the challenges that you faced?
Yeah, for folks who find themselves in the same boat and are still not quite sure what to do, you're probably sitting on a lot of the infrastructure, whether it's, here we're using Zoom. Zoom works just as well on these tablets. Any of the video conferencing apps that are out there that have an app for a mobile device would work in this scenario. Might be challenging to get after the hardware, but I've given out a number of names, and you might be able to search and find even some more than I have. So really get started. It's been very low cost for us, on the order of hundreds of dollars, not thousands of dollars, to get this kind of a solution going.
And I see that our survey is pretty much completed. And is your company pursuing the use of remote assistance for mobile plant workers? Only 15% of the folks said they already have it in place. So most of the folks either don't have it or don't need it, depending on which side of the fence you're on. So it's a very immature area. And what approach would your company typically follow to implement? The answer is use what we have. Leverage existing tools or solutions they've already purchased and see if they can be repurposed for the plant floor. That's very akin to what Chris did, was, basically these components, some, in the infrastructure, much of which already existed, and the tablets and the hard hats and the tying together of it was what was really new to this situation. So Chris, I want to thank you so much for participating in this first webinar series, to be bold enough to share your example of improving the communications across the factory.
Glad to do it.
We'll send this back to Doug.
All right, guys. So Chris, I also want to say thanks. And that was actually really, really inspiring. To me, it's just a really great example that solutions, to these really complex problems, they really depend on solid, supportive leadership, but they also really depend on bright, creative people like you and your team. So very, very impressive. John, if you can move to the next slide. All right, so our next presenter has, for decades, been really guiding executives in the industry, in the manufacturing industry, around transformational thinking and disruptive thinking for both building strategies, but also for execution in their business. So Doug's going to really take some time to identify some of the best practices that we heard from the General Mills story, but just also key practices that in a time of crisis like this, the leaders really need to think about putting in place and challenging themselves to maybe operate a little bit differently. And I think what you'll hear from Doug is that these same skills are things that can really help a company, when this is all over, really help to drive a new kind of cultural change about being transformational and disruptive thinking across the company. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Doug Berger.
Thanks. In 1 second while I bring up the slide. So I want to talk about, leadership in a time of crisis. And right now, where countries focused on mitigating the urgent danger from COVID-19, yet hidden behind the danger is a time of opportunity, innovation, and urgency. And as we just heard from Chris at General Mills, he improvised a solution, received the go-ahead, and he got it operational and scaling within a matter of days. And while this might not be the long-term ultimate answer, it's certainly good enough to meet their needs. And what Herb Simon, the Nobel laureate in economics and a founder of artificial intelligence, he called this satisficing. In Saturday, on a Wall Street Journal reported that Ford produced 2.4 million protective face shields for medical personnel in a period of 2.5 weeks. And Ford went from identifying the need through the design and the FDA approval. They did that within a week. And that kind of innovative engine is the engine that originally built Ford, and that kind of engine is the engine that gave Ford leadership with the Mustang. And then the journal also reports on a company called Thar Process that makes organic ingredient extraction and purification equipment. And they were able to pivot and fast track existing technology to build machines to sanitize and reuse the N95 medical mask. So what all these people had in common was being in action very, very rapidly. And we're going to call that, battlefield management. And in what we look back on as normal times, the prevailing narrative is don't rock the boat and avoid risk. But in a crisis, the boat's unavoidably rocking and the risk is ever present no matter what you do or you don't do. So the barriers to innovation and change are the lowest that you will ever have. And the door is open for what I call hidden in plain sight opportunities. And the possibility is generating a new narrative that emboldens people like Chris and others and exists and lasts once the crisis is passed. And this is where, as Jim Wetzel says, you don't want to let a crisis go to waste, and certainly you don't want the human cost of a crisis to go to waste. You want the response to be something that truly has transformational potential. So, these opportunities coming from what we could call battlefield leadership, where in a crisis, life on the front line, life on the production floor is messy, it's rapidly changing, it's often chaotic. And there are problems, but more importantly, there are opportunities that are in plain sight to people on the front line that are not visible back in command headquarters. So let's speak to 4 aspects of battlefield leadership. The first aspect is giving a voice to people on the front line. More precisely, is having a generous listening for people on the front line so their voice is welcomed, is heard, and it leads to action. And then second is aiming for a satisfactory solution, solutions that might be temporary, expedient, disposable, bypassing the processes and bureaucracy of normal times into being agile and what I call let's move on it mode. Let's just move on it. And then breaking down barriers to collaboration, to coordination, and to speed. So how do we get access to that? And there's a shift in perspective where if we moved into the inner world of the innovator and the inner world of people in leadership authority, a peek into their inner dialogue would reveal, hey, Doug, I agree with what you're saying. This isn't really anything new for me, but what can I do? So let's focus on just that. What can I do? And give me a sidebar for a moment. For anyone who's in command or authority, the world of action exists as conversation, speaking and listening. That's action. If you're a sports team manager or you're a coach, you never get on the playing field. You stand on the sidelines, yet what you say determines plays on the field. And how that works is that sports managers and coaches, they speak the language of action, execute, improvise on the playing field. And that's a very different conversation than the ones by spectators yelling in the stands or by sports commentators. So the opportunity is for people in authority positions to engage in these battlefield conversations that actually make action happen in real time on the shop floor, like Chris was talking about. And so that first point is giving voice to the front line. We're in a crisis on the front line. It's messy and rapidly changing. There are problems, there are opportunities. There are opportunities in plain sight to people on the front line, but they're not visible back in the command headquarters. And we need people to come forth to vividly describe those conditions on the battlefield and the opportunities they see. And then we need to recognize that as leaders, you're going to disagree. Why? Because what the battlefield front line sees doesn't match up with what you see and you know, because you're back in command headquarters. So, leadership can be a role model and have a conversation that sets the stage for frontline people to be really forthcoming. And you could say something like, in quotes, when I disagree, it means I don't see it that way. And that's exactly what I want you to remind me as a leader, that I ask for new perspectives. Thanks. And then a side benefit of that is a huge morale booster, especially during lockdown. And then for the innovator, recognize that in a crisis, headquarters knows it doesn't have all the answers, and that the barriers to being proactive are the lowest they'll ever be, and again, for you to be forthcoming. So then there's perfect solution that we go for it maybe in normal times, but good enough is is fine in crisis. And so if we break down satisfactory, what we see is first, making sure that leaders have a mutual understanding with the front line of what the problem is, what the impact is, and what people see as the solution, and how the solution ties in. Remembering that the front line is going to see it differently. And then the front line can walk through the solution. And you can have this conversation to see if the solution is good enough. We're not looking for perfection. We're actually looking for good enough. Is it temporary? Is it disposable? If so, can it do any harm to the long run of the business? If not, okay. And might it also be a stepping stone to a new approach or even a new business, as I shared some of those Wall Street Journal articles.
Hey, Doug. Hey, Doug. I hate to cut you off a little bit, but unfortunately, we're running out of time. So if I know you still have a little bit left, if it's possible to just kind of wrap up some key thoughts, that would be great.
Okay, great. So the main thing I want to then focus on is just conversation to break down barriers, all right, where you really want to recognize that the leadership in collaboration with the innovator can break down the barriers, can convey trust, can ask people what decision rights they need and what cover they need. And at the end of the day, it's really about having action conversations, making requests, who, what, by when, and getting promises by leadership to provide it. Thanks. Okay, Doug, back to you.
That was great, Doug. Doug, that was really, really good. And these are really, really important skills. So, John, if you could flip back to the last slide, we'll wrap up real fast here. Hopefully, all of you found this valuable today. Really, our goal is to try to have actionable, sort of ideas or best practices that are from practitioners to practitioners. So, we love your input. We'll follow up with you in an email with some further information about forums that you can participate in, as well as the on-demand, and also information on our next webinar. And we'd love, like I said, information and thoughts and topics coming from all of you as well. So with that, and from all of us, thank you very much for joining us for this first one, and hope it was valuable. Feel free to pass this along once you get the on-demand link, and we'll talk with you all on the next one. Take care. Bye.